Spalding. Welcome to Back to Business. I'm here with Tim Marks, founder and owner of Ecotech Marine. We've been all over the factory. It's been a fantastic look at everything that you're doing. Tell me, how'd you get started in manufacturing and what made you interested in building saltwater aquariums?
So I went to college at Lehigh University here in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and at the time I had never thought that I was going to pursue entrepreneurship or manufacturing. I wanted to be a Formula One driver or maybe a Formula One tech on the lines, and I wanted to pursue mechanical engineering and go from there. When I got to Lehigh, I actually, ironically, ended up pursuing environmental engineering with a specialty in wastewater chemistry. But prior to going to school, I was a hobbyist in the saltwater aquarium world, and I had a home aquarium at my house in Scarsdale, New York, that I didn't want to take down when I went to Lehigh, about an hour and a half away. I thought there would probably be a way that I could come back and visit. In fact, I had a girlfriend at the time, so I figured, okay, I'll come back home to visit her, and I can take care of my aquarium. So what I started doing was when I got to school and before I got to school, I started looking into how I could automate this saltwater aquarium. I couldn't afford to just go out and buy a bunch of equipment, so I needed to make devices, peripherals that would make the process of maintaining this aquarium easier and simpler for my mom. So I wrote a little manual and I built a bunch of equipment and I told her how to use all this stuff, and that if you just do X, Y, and Z during the week, that I'll come home on the weekends or every other weekend and I can help with the rest. That worked for a little while. Unfortunately, the aquarium didn't make it long. I probably got through most of my freshman year, and eventually it did crash, as often happens, especially when we can't be there around the aquarium. But it lit my passion for manufacturing, for making things, and to some extent for entrepreneurship too. By the end of freshman year, and I literally by summer after my freshman year, so this is circa 2001, I had registered Ecotech Marine as a trademark and formed a sole proprietorship with my friend and business partner, Justin Lawyer. And we started making and seeing how best we could sell a handful of different aquarium devices. And we actually have some in the display case over here that we had made during college. Shortly after that, I met my future business partner, Patrick Clayson. He was actually in my fraternity at Lehigh. And when we moved off campus, we roomed together, and he shared with me that he had a huge passion for saltwater aquariums too, and that he had aquariums growing up, but he had never had a saltwater aquarium. And so I was like, well, absolutely, let's start one. So we started a saltwater aquarium in our apartment at that time, and he just became very, very passionate about the industry, the hobby, and about the business that Justin and I were kind of trying to do, but it wasn't particularly active. And Pat, absolutely brilliant at finding resources wherever they may exist, determined that Lehigh University had tremendous entrepreneurial resources to foster entrepreneurship and to launch it. And as we found out later, the entire South Side and Bethlehem in general, and the Lehigh Valley to a large extent, offered a lot of resources to help us too. So we just took it one step at a time, and before I knew it, in grad school, my master's project was the Vortec propeller pump, which was the product that we launched our entire business with.
So you started back in 2001, and we've gone through your factory. Suffice it to say, you've grown quite a bit since 2001. In particular, we went through your SMT room. Can you talk about SMT and what that means?
Yeah, SMT stands for Surface Mount Technology. It's a method of manufacturing circuit boards. The alternative would be through-hole manufacturing of circuit boards, which is a different design of circuit boards. Most circuit boards nowadays that you see in an iPhone or anywhere else are a bunch of small chips placed on top of a circuit panel, and they don't necessarily have holes through them. They're just placed on top, on copper pads, traces they're called, on the top of the circuit board. And that's what we do in the other room, which is a semi-automated process and allows us to build all of our own circuit boards here in-house for our variety of different products. I'd be guessing, but I'd have to say we probably have 15 to 20 different unique SKUs for our circuit boards. So that's how many different circuit boards we make.
When you think of a cell phone, for example, smartphone, Apple designs the phone, Foxconn manufactures it. So for the saltwater aquarium business, you're kind of the combination of the design and manufacturing all together. Mm-hmm. Why is it that you don't just design like Apple and then send it off to China to have somebody else manufacture it?
There's a whole list of reasons. I could start with an easy but absolutely true issue of piracy and copying. So in order to accomplish that, in real terms, we would have to find a contract manufacturer overseas. Because if we're going to make the whole product overseas, we're not going to be working with the injection molding vendor himself, and the machining vendor himself, and the pad printing vendor, and the rubber gasket maker, and everything, and then sending them all to another business, and then having a manager oversee all the assembly workers. We would have to find a company that will do that for us, that will work with the sub-vendors. That's like what Foxconn is, a contract manufacturer. When you do that, you put a lot of trust in their hands, and you're basically hoping that, one, they'll control the product to the quality standards that you set, which can be made simpler by writing down what those quality control standards are and then periodically auditing to make sure they're performing them. But you're also holding them to the standard that they're not going to sell your product on the side. And there's a lot of interest in American design and American made aquarium equipment in China because they do have an aquarium industry. But it's very hard to get American products into China because of their tariff, the way they tariff products. It's very expensive. And so there is a lot of demand for contract manufacturers of products that are sold in America to sell them under their own brand names in China. And we can have intellectual property in the US, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to get us anywhere in China. And on top of that, even if we do register for intellectual property, a patent in China, it would be very expensive to defend that patent in China. And as we've seen, often not very successful.
So I was in China in 2002. From 2002 to 2004, I lived in Shanghai, and I witnessed a lot of companies coming to China to do manufacturing in China. You were starting your company around the same time, and you decided to stay here. Yep. When you think about the importance of manufacturing to our country, to our society, one of the things that comes to mind is World War II. We go to war. There's a lot of companies that are manufacturing products that are repurposed to build. So auto manufacturers start building aircraft for the war effort. One of the things that I looked at as a military officer, particularly in the latter period of my career, was our industrial base and our ability to manufacture without the support of China, who could potentially be an adversary in the future. So you have a manufacturing line here. One of the things that we have when we have manufacturing is you have the ability to flex things. So if the Department of Defense had an issue, had a crisis or something where they needed a product manufactured, they could come to you and say, hey, we need you to build this circuit board, and you have the skills to basically both design and build it. That's something that I think. Do you think about that when you look at your business, or is that something that even crosses your mind in terms of, because I think you're a businessman, you're an entrepreneur, you don't think about national security issues, but clearly having a business like yours in Pennsylvania is important to our nation's security. Is that something that's ever crossed your mind?
So we do think about national security issues a lot here, actually, because I'm 38 years old, but in the 20 years that I've been doing this, I've learned so much about just how critical geopolitical topics are, and critical to my long-term success. We think about diversification all the time, and one of the ways that we think about diversification, actually, I've had this exact conversation that you brought up with my business partners. One of us specifically, my business partner Justin, was the one who brought it up, and there is a certain amount of comfort in our investment in manufacturing, knowing that if there were ever just an awful situation that happened, a war, or even something perhaps less extreme, a U.S. Contractor needing a component, that we could stay in business or survive by providing our services to that group of the economy. And so, I mean, yeah, it's something we think about, and it's something that makes me feel a little safer, knowing that I can weather storms.
So there's a perception in China, and even I think somewhat in the United States, that the U.S. doesn't do manufacturing. Obviously, you have an argument to counter that. What are some of the challenges for people who want to get into manufacturing, and what are some of the things that probably they don't know that are available to Americans if they want to start a business like this, that maybe makes it less challenging than would appear to be true? Tax incentives, the cost for building, power, automation. What are the things that kind of on the positive side, and then what are the things that are challenges that keep you up at night?
So on the positive side, there's a enormous volume of creative, brilliant, and hardworking people in this country. Way more than people really give ourselves credit for. We as a culture are truly innovative, and I've seen just how innovative we can be as Americans in our industry, just in terms of how we compete with our international competitors, which include competitors from Germany, Spain, Italy, China, all over the world. And I'm proud of that innovation that we have, and the innovation and the American aspect of what we do. So that's a huge advantage to us, being in America. Additionally, there is just a huge network. There are manufacturers. They're just not exactly, there aren't as many contract manufacturers. There's not as many shops that you can go to and say, look, here's what I need. And because of that, and because raw materials are more expensive here, and because labor is higher, it can be very challenging for a budding entrepreneur to say, look, I have a great idea. It's a somewhat complex mechanical device, and I need help to actually get it to market. And yes, you can use consultants to help you, and you're going to pay a lot. And if you did, and if I were that consultant, I would still explain that, look, we can build a lot of this stuff with shops here in the US, or we can make and prototype and design with shops in China. The latter is going to be a significant amount cheaper, to the tune of 20 to 25% the cost of doing it in the US. Not 20 to 25% cheaper, 20 to 25% the cost. Rule of thumb is 1/5, or multiply a US source by 5. That's a big multiplier for the difference in a normal machine component US versus China. What we did was we said, well, we don't need a contractor to machine this stuff for us. We're going to machine it ourselves. And so that's a little unique. So if you are an entrepreneur and you're in the manufacturing world and you've got a somewhat complex mechanical device, I would urge you to go to a vocational school and learn how to actually machine and make stuff, if you don't already, which is something that we have in this country. I'd love to see more, but we do have it. We also have, and it's going to vary from state to state and community to community, but we do have a big interest and a big respect for entrepreneurship, which is not true everywhere else in the world. And we have people who see themselves as individuals and feel a passion for pursuing entrepreneurship, which is not exactly true in everywhere else in the world. And so there are means of going out to your local small business development center, to a university, to a successful person that you know, and saying, what kind of resources do you know of that could help me get started with my idea? And it could be as simple as networking with someone who is personally helpful, or someone that knows these other places, or send you to these places directly to get help. And there's money to be had. It's not always easy to get, and sometimes it is hooked up with universities, which is one of the values of going to school, but it's not the only option.
So the universities have programs for entrepreneurs. There's opportunity zones that we've talked about that provides tax incentives for people that want to start this type of business. There's low energy costs. There's fairly consistent low real estate costs. There's innovative people. So why are all these companies saying you can't manufacture in the United States? Because it sounds like, and in particular, you say there's all kinds of value add that you can do to your products that you couldn't do if they were in China, for example. So why are people saying, hey, we can't manufacture in the United States? So companies like Apple, right? Which, Apple has $260 billion in cash, last time I checked. And they get a lot of that on the basis of exploited labor and poor environmental conditions in the country that they have most of their manufacturing. You have labor standards. You have environmental standards. You have OSHA. You have EPA. You have equal opportunity for employment. All of these things are things that we went through as a country in terms of equality under the law that don't exist in China. I've lived there. I've seen it. But, why would they say, hey, it's better for us to manufacture in China than to manufacture in the United States, given everything you've just said?
Cost. It's cost, and the fact that when I say cost, I don't just mean it's cheaper. I also mean it's cheaper because of the lack of those environmental regulations and human safety regulations. And I have not spent as much time in China as you have, but fortunately I have been there a handful of times, and so it's that's been really good for me as a person, as a businessman, to see firsthand just how things are done. The problem with Apple continuing to do this, and not to single Apple out, but the problem with any enterprise that continues to send very advanced manufacturing and assembly processes overseas, is that they're not developing those manufacturing processes. Someone else is. And there's a lot, we are a consumer-driven economy, and we like toys and gadgets. Electronics are as popular as it gets. It's scary to me that we're not investing in the technology to actually manufacture this stuff on our own. Because automation does make things more economical and does provide, look, automating a process in the US still provides more jobs than sending it all out to some country overseas. And that's just for the people who are working the automation equipment at the manufacturer. But what about the people who are designing the automation equipment? Well, there's jobs there. And we don't have any of that. It's wrong to say we don't have any of it. We have a variety of different automation equipments. We do a lot of machining in the US. We have robots operating machine tools. We have automotive manufacturing. We have all kinds of automated processes, but not as much. We're not doing it as much as we could, and it's a staggering number about how much money Apple has, and that is money that could be invested in facilities here. I am not the CEO of Apple, nor do I pretend to know everything that they know and the decisions that they make. But in a general kind of way, that's absolutely true. They could be using that money to develop state-of-the-art plants here. And automation does pay off over time. It's paid off for us in the SMT environment. The SMT environment is a semi-automated environment, and it allows us to manufacture circuit boards for just as cheap, if not cheaper, than we were buying them from overseas. And we don't have to bring in thousands of boards at the same time and then just one by one go through that inventory. We make 2 days worth of inventory at a time continuously.
So what do you say about, there was a labor study done by David Autor, who's an MIT labor economist, and it came out in January, I think, of 2016, and it was called China Shock. And basically, their empirical study said that all of these millions of jobs, I think something like 5 million manufacturing jobs that went away when China entered the WTO and we offshored all our manufacturing. At the time, theoretical economists said all those jobs are going to be replaced with white-collar jobs. They're going to become computer programmers. They're going to have jobs on the gig economy. What David Autor and his colleagues said was that didn't happen. Those jobs just went away permanently. For the communities, over, I think, something like 70,000 factories went away during that time, and they're still continuing to go away. But those communities never came back. Those jobs never came back. So in a way, when you have a company like this, when you're manufacturing, you're creating jobs in the community. And it is true that each manufacturing job has an associated 4 extra jobs within the community that's providing support for the people that live there, that work in the factory, and then also to support the factory itself. That's an important element of our economy that has been stripped away. And it's part of the challenge that I saw as I began to look into this, not only the industrial-based challenges, but the challenges just to our society in terms of economic opportunity. Not everybody is going to be a computer programmer. You have some employees here that have been here a long time. You know, theoretical economists would have you believe that everybody wants to do a certain type of job and they don't like this work. But it seems to me that, you know, based on what I saw and people that have been here a long time, there's people that love this work, want to do this work, are good at this work, find pride in this work. So what's your experience in kind of, you know, dealing with employees?
My experience is that the assumption that a labor job that disappears will just manifest itself in a white collar or a programming or a soft job, a software job or whatever, it doesn't strike me as based on any kind of like real understanding of humans that I have. Some people just prefer to work with their hands. It's human nature. We've always been like this as a species. To deny that or to pretend like it just doesn't have to be that way strikes me as a little snobby and not really a reasonable outlook. And I don't agree with it. I mean, fundamentally, I don't agree with it. I think that as a society,
you want to work with your hands. I can tell.
Yeah.
You prefer it.
Look, I haven't put on a suit. The only time I put on a suit is to go to a wedding or a funeral. And if I'm at a wedding, it comes off pretty quick. The rest of the time, I've got my Dickies on and I'm in the garage working on my cars. Or I'm hands deep in an aquarium, or working with the reptile and amphibian project, or on my CNC mills here at work, or on my 70-year-old South Bend lathe, World War II machine that was used in the World War II effort at home that I restored. I like working with my hands. Yeah, I know how to I don't do computer programming, but I know how to program a CNC machine, and I know how to I know how to CAD model, and I know how to use a lot of computer programs. I don't write code. Some people just like making things and building things, or even just screwing things in or working with things. And we have operators here that all they know is how to, or knew at some point, was really how to put something together. That was their skill, and they have experience doing that. And they did so well with us that we never wanted to get rid of them. They really enjoy our culture here. We've had them for 12 years. And over that time, as we invested in automation, they're the ones with those premium jobs, those premium operator positions where they're actually in the nice SMT room, using the high-end equipment, and they get a lot of value out of that, and it provides a path for people that, everyone is different. You can't just assume that everyone would be happier sipping coffee from a mug and coding on a computer in an apartment. It just doesn't work that way.
So you mentioned your new facilities in the intermodal area. One of the things that, as I began to get into this challenge that we have in our country, that I recognized was that our infrastructure is crumbling. We're $5 trillion in arrears. The American Civil Engineer Society grades our infrastructure as a D. How important is infrastructure to your business? Particularly because you say you ship half of what you make overseas. And then the other thing that we stopped doing, these are all things, by the way, that we stopped doing over the last 30 years. We were doing them during the Cold War, in particular, investing in infrastructure. We were also spending almost 2% of gross domestic product on science and technology research. So basic science research, Silicon Valley, a lot of Boston, a lot of these tech hubs became tech hubs because people like you happened to be around this. Steve Jobs talks about all of this stuff that I think he swiped from Xerox PARC in Silicon Valley to help Apple become what it was. All of these things are challenges that unfortunately you don't have. It all went away before you started your business. We talked about before this interview tariffs, the reintroduction of tariffs, because one of the things that enabled China to do what it did was the removal of the most favored nation trading status requirement for them, the entrance of them to the World Trade Organization, and basically the getting rid of permanent tariffs. China doesn't believe in free trade. They subsidize their manufacturing before jobs. So in between infrastructure, science and technology investment, and the lack of tariffs, because you mentioned one of the major costs, the only cost, or the only benefit is cost in China. Can you go through each of these: infrastructure, the lack of science and technology investment, and the reimposition of tariffs, how you think about each of those in terms of your business?
So infrastructure is relevant to us. We do import components, and we do export finished goods. They come into ports. They need to get to us on our roads. It's all pretty much done. The trucking companies are private, but they're using public roads. I unfortunately like infrastructure in terms of other people's businesses around our area, and having good consistent power and everything else is not something that really matters to me, because I'm doing most of the things I need to do either in here or with vendors primarily from overseas for the components that we bring in and then turn into finished goods. And but relating to your question about investment in science and technology, I mean, that's where my company came from free money through grants from either privately funded organizations or state-run organizations. I don't believe we ever were able to take advantage of any kind of federal money, but my business partner Pat would definitely know the answer to that one. I mean, one of the big advantages we've always had over China was our innovation and our science and technology. I mean, we still have a more innovative culture, but they're investing a lot of money into improving that over there as well. They're spending their money to make their economy more competitive, both domestically within China and abroad over here. And it just seems like we're not spending money to do anything. And so the tariffs are what the tariffs are. They now exist. I've always thought that it sure would be nice if that tariff money was actually going somewhere specific that the country could get behind. There was never any comment about what is being done with this tariff money. In fact, it was sold to people that don't know any better as they're the ones paying for it. Literally, they're not paying for it. I'm paying for it as a business owner importing components from China. I'm not importing finished goods. So if you're importing finished goods at a higher price, you're paying even more for it.
So this, I think this is an important point. We talked about this before. So your competitor that makes saltwater aquariums, if they make the whole aquarium with all the components and they import it into the United States, they're not charged a tariff.
So it varies on a case by case. So we don't currently manufacture glass aquariums. So this is the topic right here. We don't currently manufacture glass aquariums. So we'll just put that one aside. But we do make pumps, lighting, and peripherals, automation and control equipment, and peripherals that are used to keep the inhabitants of the aquarium alive and thriving. In some cases, the components that we are tariffed on are tariffed the same for the individual raw components going into them as the finished good would become. So for example, if I take a motor and a housing and I assemble that here into a pump, the total cost of that may be less, same, or more. Well, let's hold off on more. It may be less or same as someone else importing a pump. But there are some cases, and this is what really gets us, there are some cases where someone can bring in a completely finished, with no American hands touching it, in box, full color print, ready to sell box, good from China to the US that it has no tariff on it. Whereas I'm paying tariff on all the, just the components that I'm bringing in that I can't buy from anywhere else in the world because they're literally only made in China, like the LEDs and the SMT components. And we're always trying to find non-Chinese suppliers for these things. And when I put that product together, I'm actually paying more tariffs to employ all my employees than that other company is running in the garage of someone's house.
So why would that finished product not be tariffed when all the subcomponents, some of which you use in your product, are tariffed? Can you explain?
So there's a really simple reason for that. So for one thing, because no one has specifically taken notice of, so let's just be specific here. I'm referring to LED lighting. So if you bring in a full LED luminaire from overseas, you don't experience a tariff on it if you resell it here in the US. I manufacture LED luminaires. They're very high end, very specific, and I have a tremendous amount of cost associated with the tools that I bought to manufacture the circuit boards and the LEDs themselves, the LED boards themselves here in the USA, and a lot of trained employees to put this all together. But I am tariffed on all the components that I bring in from China to build that luminaire, even though there's nowhere else to get them.
So have you asked anybody for a reason why you're, not really your competitors, because they're probably selling for different markets, but why that product would not be tariffed when the subcomponents, clearly, if you were building that product, would be tariffed? So
my guess is it's because there's a perception that China is the one paying for the tariffs that needs to be maintained, that is blatantly not true, and that if they tariff that particular LED luminaire, well, guess where there's also LED luminaires? Home Depot, Lowe's, maybe even Best Buy. And when a consumer walks in and sees that their big box store product has gone up in price because of these tariffs, they're not going to like that. So it just happens to be one area that overlaps with what I specifically do that creates an unfair playing field for us as an enterprise and artificially props up Chinese imports.
So you just said something, Home Depot, Target, Walmart. So could it be that Home Depot, Target, Walmart have petitioned the government to make sure that they don't have tariffs on those products?
I'm certain it does, and I'm certain that it's also easy to accept because everyone wants people to vote for them, and if you're hitting consumers directly in the pockets, then they're going to know about it, whereas if you hit entrepreneurs like us, we don't really talk.
Right, and I do remember talking to the Council of Economic Advisors at the White House about how they chose the tariffs. And one of the things that they try to do is, in the case where they didn't have a substitute, then they wouldn't tariff that product. But if in the case that they did have a substitute, they could go to Europe, or maybe it was domestically manufactured, they would put a tariff on it. I think one of the things that you realize that we're not going to rebalance this unless you begin to look at this holistically and not just in terms of individual products, whether or not they have an ability to replace that from another provider.
So that is true, is exclusions. So exclusions do exist, and you're able to apply for exclusions. And typically they only give you, the way the exclusions work is that you have a period of time to essentially get a new supplier. They take the tariff away for a period of time to get a new supplier on the hook. But that's not always possible. Sometimes the only way to do that is to, in our case, invest in manufacturing it on our own. Well, I would love to invest in manufacturing that component on my own. Let's just take injection molding. I would love to invest in injection molding. There's great technology in injection molding these days. And I have a real passion for machining. So, making molds goes hand in hand with injection molding. The only problem is I just lost 25% on top of my bill of material in tariffs. So I just lost even more money that I could use to go ahead and invest in injection molding. The one exclusion for that one product for 1 year, that one component for 1 year, and by the way, they're never going to give you an exclusion for injection molded components because there's plenty of injection molding vendors in the US, but they're not 25% more expensive than Chinese injection molding vendors. They're 5 times more expensive. And the terms that go along with it often is not as favorable: larger order quantities, longer lead time, associated with the fact that it's a more competitive marketplace.
Is that because there's more labor required in the molds, or what is causing that?
The price discrepancy.
Right.
It's the cost of living in the U.S., which is a fair and reasonable one. But I attribute a lot of it to, so I know if I bring the injection molding in-house that I can make the components in-house for the same price I'm buying from overseas. So in other words, the raw component aspect of it just isn't there. It's the margin. It's the margins that companies in the U.S. need to make to survive, and I respect that.
But that's what the tariffs are designed to, because let's be honest, the Chinese Communist Party is not, selling injection molded products to the United States because they're benevolent. They're creating jobs for the Chinese people.
Yeah.
And this is how mercantilism works. You create this uneven balance in terms of this ability to have fair and reciprocal trade, and that's what they've done. They've basically taken advantage of us, our nation, our people, to transfer jobs from America to China in order to maintain legitimacy, so they can continue to control the country. This is something that we should have stepped in and fixed a long time ago. In addition to tariffs, some of them haven't worked out for you. Some of them maybe have. It's probably a mixed bag, but we could do a lot better. And probably you need an across-the-board tariff, just like it used to have prior to them coming in or losing that most favored nation trading status. But other than tariffs, supposing those kind of discrepancies went away because the United States was much more focused on, rather than just making consumers feel good at Walmart, we're going to make sure that we have an ability to be competitive. And actually, because we have a consumption market, we can build our own things. But other than tariffs, what are the things that you think the government could do to help people like you that are actually building businesses that are thriving?
So the way I see tariffs are that you're never going to be able to tariff China out of the equation. 25% is simply not going to do it. It's still cheaper to buy many things from China than it is from the US. And that's okay. But here's what I would like. I've talked about this in the past with my business partners, and I think there's room for a program that uses the money from these tariffs to then reward entrepreneurial US manufacturers to further invest in their own processes. So, collectively, if I'm paying this, average tariff across all my products, and we throw the term 25% around, but it varies. In some cases 0, in some cases 25, in some cases less. If the government can use this money that, look, guys, I want to invest in injection molding. Let's come back on the same example. I want to invest in injection molding technology. I'm going to put together this business model that makes a case for why injection molding technology is valuable to me, the pricing and why it makes sense to bring it in-house and apply for a loan or, or some form of government-backed program that allows that tariff money to be put to use building U.S.
How hard is that to do today in terms of access to capital for capital improvements in a manufacturing space? Say you want to put in an injection molding line. How easy is it for you to go to a bank and get the money to do that?
So it depends on the individual company's banking, relationship with their financial institute. In our case, we would primarily use profit to invest in capital equipment. Is how we do it. We
But
don't
in
necessarily
China,
take loans.
the China, if you're a manufacturer, you can go to the Chinese bank and they'll just give you the money.
Yeah, which is what I would
Right?
like to.
But that you can't do that.
No.
Now, so you can't do
And
that.
that's what would be nice if somehow the money from the tariffs could be redirected back into doing exactly that.
So wait, it gets better because one of the other things, groups that I talk to are institutional investors, and I say, okay, do you have a program here, a retirement fund? Say, here in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Employees Retirement Fund. Do you have a program in your retirement fund that says, hey, you're going to invest some of your money in businesses that are in your own communities? You know what they say? No, we don't have anything like that. But if you're in China, that Pennsylvania employee fund is investing in those businesses in China because it's going to the People's Bank of China,
Right.
ostensibly to buy equities or bonds. That's
Right.
what happens.
Right.
But of course, that hard currency goes into the People's Bank of China, and then that money, a manufacturer like you can go to the bank and say, hey, I need money to expand my
Right.
line because I'm going to hire more people.
Right.
This is a challenge that we face. There's a terrible cycle of the loss of capital, innovation, technology, and talent, all of which we've talked about today. And it's basically robbing the economic vitality of our society. And it's being sent to China on behalf of this idea that as they grow economically prosperous, they'll become politically more liberal like us.
Right.
And of course, we know that's incorrect. The Chinese Communist Party is what it is. I think one of the things that the national security strategy is trying to endeavor to create in the United States is this virtuous cycle where capital, instead of flowing to China, innovation, technology, and talent, it's coming into here. And what we're talking about is that whether it be institutional investor money, whether it be university endowment money, whether it be, rather than spending $800 billion on defense, that some of that money gets recharacterized as infrastructure, manufacturing, science and technology, investment, STEM education. And I think this is where the point that you're making about being able to invest in injection molding is one example of how having the ability to bring that capital back in the U.S. and make it available to entrepreneurs like yourself is an important component of our society that, quite frankly, went away after the end of the Cold War. It went away when the Berlin Wall fell, and increasingly has gone away ever since, and in particular went away when China entered the WTO. So I think this has been a good conversation. Is there any other thing that you might add that people would like to know about, because my goal here is to not only educate the American people, but also educate policymakers in D.C. who don't really get a chance to talk to people like you and understand the problems from your perspective and the things that they could do sitting in Congress as a congressman or a congresswoman or a senator or as a president to make your job easier so that you can make us all better.
I would just say that as someone in the manufacturing world, I have just seen how very, very few people in politics or media, positions of power, that places I consider positions of power actually know about what manufacturing is. Many people know basic economics, but they don't really understand how manufacturing as a field involves everything that you ever learned in school, whether it be economics or sociology or psychology or engineering or anything. It's all of that is built into manufacturing. And I just feel like it would be nice if, I consider the media's knowledge of it to be zero. Politicians at least will take their tours around their community to see. It would be nice if people in positions of power would actually take the time to learn a little bit, truly more, not just surface level, but truly learn more about what manufacturing does. I think it'd be more obvious to them if they did the points that you have. It's pretty obvious.
Tim, thanks so much. This has been a great conversation. Thanks
Thank you.
for being part of Back to Business.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Today we had a great discussion about manufacturing with Tim Marks, owner and founder of Ecotech Marine. I hope you liked the conversation. I also hope you saw the last episode with regard to coronavirus and its opportunities and challenges faced by businesses in the DC area. Make sure to leave comments below, like and subscribe, hit that bell to be notified of our next episode. And thanks for being part of Back to Business. I'm General Spalding.